You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this special episode of Addressing Gettysburg. Normally you hear us talking about Patreon, and you're probably numb to it because every podcast you listen to has a Patreon account or has some way where they're looking for your support. And to some, it might seem tacky. I know for me, it still kind of feels tacky. But the fact of the matter is that myself and all the other people that you're listening to who are asking for Patreon, well, this is what we do either part-time or full-time. And it takes up a lot of time. And there is a lot, I'm speaking for myself, I don't know what these other people do, but speaking for myself, this is a 24-hour-a-day thing for me. I make time when other people wouldn't make time in order to be able to do things. A social life for me is kind of, well, frankly, it's part of the show because that's the only way I would have time to do it. You know, when we have our get out of the car tours or things like that, that's kind of how I socialize. There is a lot that normal people are not willing to do that we are willing to do. And so when we ask for support on Patreon, or whether it's Patreon or getting local businesses to sponsor us and things like that, it's because of the amount of time that we put into it, and we feel that we provide a valuable service to you, the listening audience, and to our local community as well, because we love our local community and we want to share it with you. We want you to come here and see it and patronize the businesses and all that jazz. And, well, you know, it kind of, as they say, takes a village to raise a podcast. And so that's kind of what we do. But, you know, I could sit and talk about all the things that we offer on Patreon and, you know, all the reasons why you should become a patron. And it's going to probably not come off too good. You'll probably roll your eyes. You probably have rolled your eyes already in this episode. So what I decided I'm going to do is I'm going to allow our patrons to tell you why you should become a patron by telling you why they became and continue to be patrons. As far as I am aware, all of the people that you're going to hear from are still patrons. And I put the call out for them to send in these recordings, I believe, a year ago. I know it was cold. I don't know if it was late fall cold or dead of winter cold or late winter cold, but it was cold when I asked, and I thought I would sit on this for a while and before I actually put it together. So here I am putting it together now. So anyway, you don't need to know this, all this stuff. This is silly ranting and ravings of me. So I'm going to let them speak for themselves right now, and we're going to start off with a fella who, every time he's in town, is kind enough to bring us peanuts and Virginia ham. Virginia peanuts and Virginia ham, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, not quite what we would call shabby stuff, delicious stuff. And let's hear from Andy Hunt right now. Why is he a patron? And then we'll comment afterwards.
Hey, this is Andy Hunt from Smithfield, Virginia. I've been a patron for the Addressing Gettysburg podcast for a little while now. The reason I chose to be a patron and will continue to do so is I think the outlet that Matt and crew provide is sorely needed when it comes to both appreciating and understanding the Battle of Gettysburg and the area itself. What I really like about the podcast, and why I will continue to support it, is when I listen to them, and to you guys, it sounds like I'm listening to a bunch of friends talking. And there's a need for that, right? It doesn't always have to be a serious book study or a serious conversation or a serious deep dive. It allows those of us that really enjoy studying the battle, but don't take ourselves too seriously. It allows us to find a like-minded group of people. I relate almost 100% to the crew there, and the fact that I've gotten to meet them further solidifies that I'll continue to be a patron as long as I possibly can. Thanks.
Sorely needed. I don't know exactly where he's coming from when he says that addressing Gettysburg is sorely needed, but I kind of, when I started it, I kind of thought the same thing. I thought something like addressing Gettysburg, what addressing Gettysburg would become, was sorely needed. And so I started it. I noticed that there was like a dearth of, I guess what some people call edutainment, or something that connects with an audience on a person-to-person level rather than an expert-to-student level, I guess is the way to say that. I used to use the term history from on high, where, you know, you hear someone with some type of bona fides, like he's a PhD or a history professor, or an LBG, or an author, or whatever. And to me, that just reminds me of being in school. You got to have some kind of a personality. I guess I'm kind of an idiot, I guess is really what I'm saying, is that I need kind of to be dazzled. I need to be entertained while I'm educated. I need good sound effects on my documentaries. I need good voices, good characters. I need characters voiced well, is what I'm trying to say, on a documentary, like a la Ken Burns, things like that. Otherwise, I just can't sit through it. And I think that's because before I got into history, I've always loved history as a kid, but my nature is in entertainment. I've just always been drawn to it. I've always been drawn to the best. I was never that guy in high school that listened to the most obscure bands so that everybody thought I was cool and an individual. No, I listened to the best because when I was a musician, I wanted to be the best. So why not listen to the best? And I'm not saying I'm the best now, but I'm striving. I'm always striving to be the best. And I think that I think I've lost the focus of the point I was trying to make talking about Andy here, to be honest with you. But anyway, so I didn't want it to be lecture-like. I wanted it to feel like you were sitting around talking to people at the Reliance Mine Saloon. And I got the idea to do it that way while sitting at the Reliance Mine Saloon many years ago, listening to guides just talking about the battle. And at the time, I was, very new to it all. I mean, this is pre-2010, so, it had to be that. Yeah, of course. So it was cool. I liked the atmosphere. I thought it was a very unique thing, and I said, I would like to replicate this one day. Now, that was easy for me to do because of listening to Howard Stern growing up, because I think it really invented that kind of feel, that locker room, just hanging out with the guys type of a feel. So that was my wheelhouse as far as how a show should go. And I had practiced, on other podcasts that no one ever heard of and no one ever will because they're not out anymore. But that was, me cutting my teeth. And so I figured, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to combine it with the topic of Gettysburg. And so that's what we got there. And I'm glad that Andy found it sorely needed, because that means we agree. I found it sorely needed as well. Moving on now to Anthony Salem, a good buddy of mine now. He's started as a patron. Met him one time, bought me a beer, and we've become friends since then. Really good guy from Ohio. Let's see what he has to say.
Hi, my name's Anthony from Cleveland, Ohio. I am a patron of Addressing Gettysburg, and I became a patron because I was enjoying the free content so much. I wanted to see what else there was. I'm a big Gettysburg nerd. I enjoy listening to the podcast very much, and I really, really think that the content offered on Patreon is worth the investment. So if you're on the fence, I encourage you to give it a try. You won't be disappointed. There's some really great content there. And if you like Gettysburg, if you like history, and if you like the Addressing Gettysburg podcast, go ahead and become a patron. You won't regret it. Thanks for your time.
Content offered is worth the investment. Look, we want to give you something in return for your pledge. So when you make a monthly pledge, we don't want you to just give us money. I mean, that would be great, right? Who wouldn't love to just get money handed to them? Everybody would love to. And a lot of people who have Patreon in various fields, artists, musicians, podcasters, filmmakers, whatever, that's what they do. And that's fine, because the people that give them the money are cool with that. They know right away that, you're not going to get much off of Patreon, but your money helps me do all the free stuff you enjoy. And that's great. I, on the other hand, felt like I was not giving them enough. That for you to pay money so that you could continue to listen to the free stuff that everybody else listens to without paying money, I felt like if I were if I were in your shoes, I'd be like, well, why am I going to do that? I can just listen to it for free. I'll let other people do it. So I figured, you know what? Let me give you something a little bit more, and also let me give you something that is going to broaden your knowledge of the Battle of Gettysburg. And that's what Patreon does, and for those of you who have been listening to the full Patreon episodes that we've been putting out there for you, they are, that's what they're like. They're full episodes about one thing, and it's more of a, I guess some people kind of compare it more to like a Joe Rogan style of just a conversation about stuff. And oftentimes we may start talking about, I don't know, anything, one thing, and then by the end of the show, you're like, wait, what was this episode about? Because, we derail, and it's often fun. It makes it fun. That's what we try to do. So we want to give you something extra in return for your pledge. Because why, it just doesn't make sense to me for you to give me money and not get anything extra in return. So that's why we do that. That's the way I want to thank the patrons, by giving them something for their money. And I think that's the way everybody should do it. It's work. Listen, I want to make this my full-time job. It's basically my full-time job. Next year, it will probably be my full-time job, the only job I do. And it's work. That's what it is. And so if people are willing to pay me to do it, I'm happy to do it. You're making my dream come true, and I appreciate that. You don't have to do that, and yet you do it anyway. And so that's freaking awesome. That's all I can say. Chad Hudson, another cool guy, another patron. Let's see what he has to say.
My name is Chad Hudson, and I've been supporting Addressing Gettysburg for about a year. I've listened to other Gettysburg-themed podcasts, and either they're too far to the intellectual side and not far enough on the layman's side, or they're just the total opposite. Addressing Gettysburg, in my opinion, strikes a good balance between both ends. Every time I listen, I learn something I didn't know about the battle, and I laugh a time or two, whether whatever I heard was meant to be funny or not. Matt, Eric, and Veronica, and whatever guest is on, enhances the show tremendously. The hosts are great compliments to one another, and the chemistry works. But, seriously, what's up with Cam?
All right, Chad Hudson there says, others are too far to the intellectual side. See, folks, we at Addressing Gettysburg know that stupidity is what makes the real difference. So you want some smart people, you go elsewhere. Here, we are unintellectual and proud of it. Okay, but seriously, we have to mix fun and humor into the show, because A, we love learning about this stuff and have fun doing it, and B, it is heavy stuff learning about war. The true cost of a war is not monetary. Money can be made back. But it's a human cost. It's a very real cost. It's a cost that people feel. And the more I learned about this, and the older I get, and the older I realize my own mortality. You know, when I was 25, you know, to watch a war movie where, you know, 100 men charge a position on a hill and 20 of them come back, there was something cool, even if it was the side I was rooting for, there was something cool about seeing the men fall in battle. And then I realized, I don't remember exactly which age it was, but it was somewhere in my 30s when I realized that I was mortal and that I could die at any moment, and that those actors falling in movies represent real men who fell, real bodies who were destroyed, real lives that were lost. And those losses of life had ramifications through dozens, maybe hundreds of more lives. And that is the cost of war. Now, I know people who work in the military. I know people who work in other branches of service, police, firemen, ambulance, etc. And the one thing they all have in common is a dark, twisted, deliciously beautiful and inappropriate sense of humor, which I always loved. And we definitely toned down our humor on the show. Every once in a while, we may kind of, you know, poke our way towards where we would normally go behind closed doors. But humor is what makes everybody heal. And so for us to do a show where we're talking about deaths and horrific, violent deaths, we have to kind of heal what that does to our empathetic sides. Or in some cases, like Eric, for example, who's experienced all of that stuff, it helps him and people like him deal with what they deal with. And so, you know, at first it bothered me that people were bothered by the humor of the show. But I realized it was therapeutic not only for us, but for many people who were listening and wrote in saying that the reason they love the show above all others is because of the humor. And I said, you know, you can't please everybody. You can't please, what is that, all the people all the time? You can't do that. So I'm not going to try to do that anymore. I'm going to please the people who I've already pleased and hope that more of them are out there and that they'll stumble upon us someday. And that's who I'm talking to. That's who I'm doing this show for. Initially, I was doing it for myself because, frankly, that's the only person I knew who was going to listen. And as time moved on, I started doing it more for the people who I know are listening and hearing their feedback. And being at Patreon, I tend to take your feedback a little more seriously because why? Because you're parting with your hard-earned money. And so I kind of tend to think that you mean what you say with all the best intentions over on Patreon. And so that's another thing. Anthony didn't necessarily, or sorry, Chad didn't necessarily mention it, but you know, that is another thing that you get over at Patreon is that your opinion carries a little more weight. With no offense to the people on the free feed, this isn't a free feed bashing thing. I love you too. I need you just as much. But yeah. All right, next up is a fellow Jersey boy, Corey Russo. Corey Russo is going to tell us why he is happy to be a patron at patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg. Go ahead, Corey.
My name is Corey, and I became a patron pretty much because I'm obsessed with history and the Civil War and obviously Gettysburg. And I just want to be surrounded by people who kind of have the same passions as I do. And that's another reason why I just love everything about addressing Gettysburg as well. I wish there was more content out there regarding history as a whole. So anything like Patreon that does kind of give quality special content about history, specifically Gettysburg, sign me up. Also because Matt and Eric and everybody over there, they do a hell of a job, and they honestly make me feel like I'm there with them in the studio or on the battlefield whenever I do listen to the podcast or watch the YouTube videos. So just everything about the whole Addressing Gettysburg situation is top notch.
Surrounded by people who kind of have the same passion I do. This is a good one. I love this. When I started this, my best friend and I were in his kitchen, and we were setting up a website, and we were, planning things out, and he said, all right, you got to list some goals for yourself. And I said, all right, like what? And he goes, well, what do you want to accomplish with this? And without thinking, the first thing that came out of my mouth is, I want to build a community of nerds who will go and explore the battlefield together, and maybe some people will make friends along the way. But at least it's something that we can all do on a semi-regular basis, get together, get to know each other, get to know the park, get to know our history as a group, so it's not so lonely and everything like that. And within 2 years of saying that, we started the Get Out of the Car tours. And that's one of many things, but that was the first thing that we did because we wanted everyone to experience Gettysburg on as many levels as possible. And the podcast is just one. That's the gateway drug, folks. Our patrons, they know ahead of time about upcoming events, as well as they get early ticket sales at a discount. That's a new thing that we're starting for patrons in 2023. So you're going to not only know about an event, like, for example, a live show in front of an audience or something like that ahead of time, but you're also going to get tickets, the opportunity to buy tickets ahead of time at a discount. So that is something that we do there. But we're looking to do other events, more social type things, because what has happened is a community has formed and people have struck friendships with people that they meet on the tours and things like that. It's a really nice thing. Now that's not anything that you have to be a patron to do, but like I said, patrons do get perks related to those things that people on the free feed don't get. So just a little thought there. But yeah, the main thing is, though, the community. I know there are bigger podcasts out there. I mean, like, that bring in millions of downloads and things like that, who do have a community. I can't remember which podcast it was, but someone told me about a podcast they listen to that has its own restaurant. And it was, anybody, I'm assuming, can go to this restaurant because their money is just as green. But it was started as a place for listeners to go and hang out at and stuff. And we have things like that in the works. But again, we need more people and all that stuff to get it done. But we're going to get it done. Slowly but surely, we're going to get it done. Okay, so moving on to Kyle. Kyle is next. Kyle, tell us what you love about being a patron.
Hi, my name's Kyle, and I'm a patron of the Addressing Gettysburg podcast. I found this podcast about a year ago, and after listening to a few free episodes of Ask a Guide, I was hooked. This podcast has so much to offer. Being a patron, I have full access not only to the free episodes, but all the interviews with expert licensed battlefield guides, historians, and authors of newly released Civil War books. The AG Today show is extremely entertaining and keeps me up to date on the latest developments and events around town. I really can't get enough of this podcast. Matt, Eric, and the rest of the team do a fantastic job. This is hands down my favorite podcast to listen to.
He says AG Today is extremely entertaining. AG Today was designed to inform you, the listener, about what there is to do when you come to town on the weekend. What local things are going on or occurred the past week. And it gives you, the listener, a chance to know about what's going on in the in the world of addressing Gettysburg, in the little goofy universe that we kind of created here. You get to meet the personalities that you might hear about on, say, Ask a Guides. Now you get to actually get to know Mike 6 Questions Lentz, as opposed to just hearing me call him 6 questions, but never actually hear him. And like people like Veronica. Veronica's new to all of this stuff. She was a very early patron and tour goer when we started doing all these things. She's very funny, and she's very hungry to learn all this stuff. And I noticed one time that we were going, me and her mother were out to dinner, and every time we would go out to dinner, the banter between Veronica and I had all three of us cracking up, and in particular the way she made fun of me and the way she didn't take my bullshit for a second. I liked that, and she wasn't doing it with any malice. That's the key, because plenty of people treat me that way, but it's usually with malice or some kind of frustration. She would do it with the roll of an eye and a smile on her face as she delivered a very biting insult to me. And it always cracked me up because it was funny and it was smart insults. And I knew I wanted to do AG Today from the very beginning, a show like AG Today. Why? Because that's my wheelhouse. That's where I'm more comfortable, and it takes no preparation whatsoever. Those are my favorite types of shows to do, where I can just go. And so we thought, okay, well, let's start doing this. Let's start telling people on Fridays as they're coming to town, what is there for you to see and do this weekend? And it kind of grew from there. And then I eventually invited Veronica to come on. She wasn't sure, but I think you'll all agree with me if you've listened to AG Today that she does a fantastic job. And on the days when she's not able to come and do the show is definitely lacking something. At least that's the way I see it. And I think you'll agree. So yeah, AG Today was always part of the plan, but I had to wait for the time to be right. I at least suspect that a show like AG Today would find a niche amongst this audience. Not the whole audience, perhaps, but a good portion of it. So that's what we did. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go on to someone else here. What does Nick Sellner have to say?
Hello, my name's Nick Sellner. I'm from Grampian, Pennsylvania. I just wanted to share with you why I decided to become a Patreon member and support the Addressing Gettysburg podcast. Originally, I was in the freeloader category on Spotify and was paying monthly subscriptions to other services that I never really completely used. And I would listen to the free episodes, the Ask a Guides, and hear the ads on there that Matt would put in, requesting people to become a member and support the show. And I thought, I've listened to enough of these episodes to understand what they're trying to do. So I decided that if I was going to pay monthly, I might as well give it to the people who deserve it. The Addressing Gettysburg makes you feel like part of the family. They put a smile on your face, even when you're having a bad day. I listen in the car on the way home, whatever. And it's funny, it's informative, it's informal. I would strongly encourage anyone who hasn't yet to become a Patreon member. In any amount that you're able to do. I'm sure that Matt would appreciate it. If you enjoy the free episodes, the Get Out of the Car tours, the Patreon episodes, none of that is free to produce. And with our help, we can support the show and continue what they're trying to do. Which, as their page says, history is not boring, and they make it that way by the way that Matt and Eric and the guests make you feel like you're just sitting there with a bunch of friends talking about the battle or about, Civil War history. So again, if you're not a member yet on Patreon, I would strongly encourage it. And I'm sure Matt would appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, so you said, pay monthly. I might as well give it to the people who deserve it. How many, honestly, think about it. How many subscriptions do you have that you rarely, if ever, use? I just went through a purge. I got a new check card, which I do once a year, just as a security thing. So I got a new, debit card. Then, after a few weeks, you start getting notifications from different people saying, hey, we're trying to process your payment, but your card is expired or something like that. And then that's how I know what I'm wasting my money on. So I go and I look and I'm like, I forgot I had that subscription. I don't need that subscription. I'm going to let it lapse. So Nick here, he's saying, well, why not? Why not subscribe to this? Because in his estimation, we deserve it. And of course, we agree with that estimation. We deserve it. But he also says that none of it is free to produce. It's funny how we're so used to consuming our entertainment for free, especially now. People my age, you consumed it for free on the radio, you consumed it for free on television, unless it was cable, then you had to pay for it. But what was the difference? Cable television had no commercials, or at least none that you were aware of. Product placement is what I'm talking about. Whereas network television did have commercials because it's free. Anybody can get it. It's on the airwaves, or at least it started on the airwaves. That's why cable was called cable, because you needed a cable to get you get it. Anyway, my point on that matter is that if you wanted uncensored, for the most part, you went and you got cable because it had HBO. You could hear all the cursing you want. You could see all the boobies you want. You could see whatever you want that they'll put out. That's where it is. You can't see that on network. Our free episode is like network television. Patreon is like HBO. Eric, when we do a Patreon episode, is always butt naked. A lot of people don't know that because that's why we don't put a camera on him. But in all seriousness, though, it is not free to produce. It takes time. And a lot of people, because they're so used to getting their entertainment for free, when they hear podcasters talking about, hey, support our Patreon or whatever, their first reaction is often to say, oh, you're just doing it for the money. And I encountered that when I first started Patreon. And I remember talking to someone else about a prominent, somewhat prominent in our little sphere, history account, kind of right after I had launched Patreon, then went on his or her Patreon and said something about never holding history hostage behind a paywall or something like that. And it got me thinking, and I was conflicted for a moment. And so I called another person who's a historian who I respect, and I said, hey, so-and-so said this. What do you think? Should I not do this Patreon thing? And the person I called, he said, that sounds like something someone who will always be poor would say. And I didn't need any more encouragement after that, because I've been poor and I don't want to be poor again. So this takes a lot of time. If it takes 2 hours or let me put it like this, when you listen to those narrative episodes that we put out, if it's an hour long, let's say, that hour took months worth of hours to produce. That's time when you would be sitting at home watching football or hanging out, having a barbecue on a Saturday afternoon, or, doing all these other normal things that people do. But I don't. I'm out there thinking about the show, thinking about how we can do things. I have, honestly, in the last year, started taking strides towards that better work-life balance, but I'm not there yet because the work is just too much to balance with life at this point. And frankly, my life, I spend it alone, so it's boring. This is at least something that would be productive. So my point is, it isn't free to produce. It takes time. There is monetary costs involved for certain things. The equipment breaks down. We have to get new equipment. There's all these things that you probably don't think of that go into it. And also, we want to upgrade equipment when we can to make a better show for you. So yeah, it isn't free. And thank you for bringing that up there, Nick, because a lot of people don't realize that. Also, a lot of people do podcasts as a hobby. And which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and you could get some success from that. But if you do it as a hobby, it's always going to be a hobby. If you treat it like it's your future job, that old saying, "Dress for the job you want and not the job you have." This is my advice to anybody who wants to start a podcast. Unless you're independently wealthy, you're not going to be able to devote all your time to it. But you can devote all your free time to it. And what does that mean? It means after work, you don't go out drinking with the boys. You go home and you work. On weekends, you don't go out drinking with the boys. You go home and you work. And if you're married, that's a different story because, you're going to have to do things with the family on the weekends and things like that. But I guarantee you there is time in your day that you are wasting either on Facebook or on Instagram, or watching, or reruns of South Park. The only thing you're not doing that's wasting your time is listening to our show, of course. But everything else that you do is a waste of your time if you want to start your own podcast and you're not working on your podcast. So that's my advice. Treat it like it's already your full-time job, and it will be, because that's kind of what I did, and it so far has worked. Maybe it's not going to work for everyone. I mean, there's more to it than that, but I'm not going to sound like I brag a lot. Okay, who's next? Let's go to, you know this guy. You know him and you love him. Mr. Questions, 6 Questions Lentz.
This is Michael 6 Questions Lentz, and answering the question of why I'm a patron on Patreon of Addressing Gettysburg, it's very simple. I get to ask questions. One of the neat features of being a patron, and one of the levels that you can support, is that you get to send in questions to Ask a Guide episodes. Now, naturally, me being a patron, I took advantage of that consistently throughout the year, so much so that I was tagged with this nickname that I have now, so there's that. You never know where your involvement will get you, so keep that in mind. And for me, I think it's a fascinating thing. This is a area ability. Addressing Gettysburg is a classroom for people to come together and to share their love and interest of Gettysburg. And being a patron allows you to support that effort, but also gets you access, like asking those questions of these experts, these licensed battlefield guides. I think that's the absolute value of what is being done here as far as being a patron on Patreon. So please consider being a patron. It is certainly worth your while. You don't have to go full first lieutenant on us. Just do whatever you feel is necessary. I just think it is a fantastic investment, and you will not regret it.
You never know where your involvement will get you. And also, you get to ask questions. Yes. So, Mike, I didn't know Mike from Adam, but he started writing into the show after becoming a patron. He'd answer the call for questions for Ask a Guides. And I noticed a pattern after like the 3rd or 4th show in that he always sent in 6 questions. Now, at first it wasn't always 6. Sometimes it was 3, sometimes it was 4. A few times maybe it was 6. But I thought the sound 6 questions Lentz sounded funnier than 3 or 4 questions Lentz or whatever. And so I just said, oh, here we got another question from old 6 questions Lentz. And I have to tell you, my initial thought when I said that was, this guy's going to hear it and he's going to get insulted and he's never going to participate again. But I threw caution to the wind and I did it. And the rest is history, of course. 6 Questions did not get offended, and he is a good friend of mine and a good friend of the show now. But yeah, you never know where your involvement will get you. He never had that nickname before he met me. And, think of Cam. For those of you who listen to AG today, Cam is one of those whack packer types. And I bet you when he started, when we first met, I'm sure that he did not. In fact, I did not picture it to go that way with him. But it just kind of accidentally happened, and I realized that these people are interesting. They're fun. They're funny. And they're people that make my life interesting because they're around me all the time. And I want to show you what makes my life interesting. I want to show you the things that I find humorous or interesting or fun or whatever the case may be, which is why we do the Get Out of the Car tours. That's why we encourage you to stop by and say hi if you're in the area. We want to get to meet everybody. We want to know people. Because we could do a lot of great things together. It just doesn't always have to come from me. But now we have the platform to enable people to do things. And, Mike is recently became a guide, I should say, at Brandy Station. Now, I'm not 100%. I should have checked on him, checked on this first with him, but I'm not 100% that this is correct. However, I believe it is. Mike became a guide there from being encouraged by Chris Army and Tracy Bear, who've both been on the show, and they know Mike through the show, and they know he knows his stuff, and they said, hey, you would be good down at Brandy Station. We got this new program growing. You should take the test. And he did, and now he's a guide there. So I'm not saying that wouldn't have happened without Addressing Gettysburg, but it did happen because of Addressing Gettysburg. So there you go. So 6 questions. Yes, you get to ask questions, and you never know what your involvement is going to get you. All right, this fella here, his name is Mark Blanchard. Mark's an educator, so let's see. Does he rip us a new one because we're not educators? I don't know. Let's see what he says.
Hey all, my name is Mark Blanchard, and the decision to become a patron of the Addressing Gettysburg podcast was easy. There are 2 things I appreciate about Matt, Eric, and now Veronica that led me to support them. First is the depth and the breadth of the content. The guests and the topics covered have given me access to the best and most knowledgeable voices in the game right now. The second reason is just as important, and that is the style and personality that infuses the content and has now created a community. This is true of the Addressing Gettysburg crew, but also the guides and the authors. Hobbies are fun, but they are more fun when shared. That is why I am and will remain a patron of the pod.
Depth and breadth of content, ... and style. And he also says hobbies are fun, but are more fun when shared. Isn't that the truth? That's why I don't pose as or claim that I'm an expert or even a historian. I mean, if you listen closely, you've heard me and Pete Carmichael arguing with each other in a friendly way of whether or not I am a historian. I say no, and he says yes. And I say, well, if I'm a historian, then anyone's a historian, and then being a historian means nothing anymore. And actually, I haven't said that to him yet. I just thought of that. So if he's listening, that's the ball's in your court now, Pete. Come back with a better argument than that. But yeah, so that's why I don't say that. I started this to share my love of the Gettysburg story and the place with whoever is willing to listen. And my hope then, as it is now, is that people would join us on our events to make the learning more memorable, perhaps. But I mean, we all tour and explore the battlefield on our own anyway. So why not try to do it together? So that's what I try to do. We're going to start holding Patreon-only events in 2023, and these events will be unique and fun, and not something the average Joe can easily arrange. You know how many people I've met on tours who are very, very, almost painfully shy, who after, I don't know, a year's worth of tours, like they come back the following year and they are further out of their shell than they were when I first met them. I don't know what it is. All I know is it works, and it's very nice to see. It's very nice to see. All right, who's next? Philip May. Philip May. Let's talk to Philip.
Guys, I just wanted to say why I am a patron of Addressing Gettysburg. My name is Philip May. I live in Marietta, Georgia, right in the shadows of Kennesaw Mountain. I've been a Civil War nut all my life, and Gettysburg is one of my obsessions. Every summer around June, I start getting that Gettysburg itch. And I try to listen to as many things and watch as many things about the battle as I can during those times. I've made 5 trips to Gettysburg beginning in the year 2000. And every time I go, I was there for the 150th. Every time I go, I get so much out of it. I bore my wife and my kids and all my friends with my Civil War trivia. And I just really enjoy it. When I stumbled on Addressing Gettysburg, I didn't know what I was getting into, but I just really enjoyed the take and the regular guy, quote unquote, attitude of the hosts, of Matt and the guys. And when they were talking about becoming a Patreon, I don't usually do that, but for some reason I just decided this is the one that I like. And all your guests from Edelman and Smith and Hartwig and all these people that you guys have on, I just enjoy it so much. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work. Philip May, signing off.
Regular guy attitude. Thank you for noticing, Philip. Thank you for noticing. Also, Philip says he doesn't normally subscribe to things. There are 2 reasons why we take the regular guy attitude. 1, laziness. Seriously, do you know how hard it is to put on airs and maintain that for years? That's hard to do. And unless you're a trained actor and or psychopath, most people can't do that. So I'm too lazy to put on a character. I mean, every time I talk into a microphone, I'm exaggerating certain aspects of myself. But it's not a character. It's not an air of someone I'm not. That's too difficult. And honestly, sometimes when I'm feeling bad, I can't fake happiness. I can't fake happy-go-lucky. So I'm going to be grumpy. And that's just the way it is. So laziness is number 1. Number 2, most importantly, is because we are regular guys. I'm a tourist who moved here. I'm not a historian. I'm not a professor. I'm not a park ranger. I'm not an LBG. I'm a regular guy who knows how to put on a show, who knows how to talk, who loves Gettysburg and loves the history of Gettysburg, and knows that there are others out there like me. So I'm trying to pull us all together. So sue me. And honestly, we just know how to communicate to the masses on their level. I think that's what a lot of history podcasts run into. The problem they run into is that there are people who like to be lectured to. I would actually argue the vast majority of the history audience is completely happy and or used to being lectured to. And so I think if you do that format, you really can't go wrong. But what I'm trying to do is, first of all, weed out the history nerds who actually have, developed personalities that include a sense of humor and pull them into the camp. But also, I'm trying to reach the average Joe that a lot in the history community curl their nose at because they think history is boring. And the average Joe thinks history is boring. I mean, not the history nerd. And I want to convert them to our church, not the Addressing Gettysburg Church, but the Gettysburg Church, the Church of the Battle of Gettysburg, because it's interesting stuff. And now more than ever, the Civil War should be very carefully studied And it should not be glossed over. It should not have any aspect of it hidden. It should be presented for the first time in the history of telling the history of the Civil War. It should be presented honestly and frankly, and as much as without bias as possible, which is very hard to do. I get a lot of hell from Southern sympathizers who refuse to believe that the war was fought over slavery and that the Confederates were not Americans from 1861 to 1865. They lived on the North American continent, but I'm sorry, they weren't Americans. They didn't want to be Americans. Of the United States ilk, that is. Anyway, so I wanted to reach the history, the person who thinks history is boring. And a friend of mine who I grew up with, there were 4 of us that were like the core group of friends. 3 of us were interested in various aspects of history. This 4th one always kind of just sat there, listening to us and like and sneering at us and rolling his eyes. And he'd always be like, I don't know, history's boring. And then it was funny because as we got older and he got his own place and I'd go over to his house, what's on television? The History Channel. And I would say, I thought you thought history was boring. He's like, well, not the way they do it. And I said, okay. And I just kept that in the back of my head. And when it came time to do Gettysburg, addressing Gettysburg, it was him who I pictured as my audience member. Because at the time when I started, I didn't have an audience. So who am I talking to? And it was my friend Jay, to prove to him that history is not boring. And that it was actually the difference between history class and history channel was history class is dry and boring. And the teachers, I'm sorry to say, were pretty boring. We had, in the history department, I remember 3 teachers who everybody raved about. All the rest were not bad, but they just didn't spark that fire that the other ones did for some people. So it's presented in schools in a very boring and dry way. Of course, people are going to think history is boring, but what they really mean is history class was boring. Why? Because they watched the History Channel. When it used to show history, people called it the Hitler Channel because all it showed was World War II documentaries. But what were those World War II documentaries? They were flashy. They had exciting music. They had great sound effects. They added sound effects to silent films. They made it interesting. And they gave it bells and whistles. And they made it fun. And that's what lured him in. And so he watched anything the History Channel put on. So that's why the narrative episodes are the way they are. It's to find that friend, my friend Jay. It's to find him in every corner of the earth that can get a podcast and lure him in. Because it is interesting, it is exciting, it is not boring. And if you think history is boring, then I suspect that you think your own life is boring because you're making history every day. You just don't know it yet because no one has cared to look at your life. But someday, someone will look back and piece it all together. Even if it's only, a niece or a nephew or one of your kids or something like that, you have a story to tell and your story matters until you start whining and crying about it, and then you just are annoying and nobody's going to care about your story. So it's all about tact. Okay, so here you go. Ladies, man, I hesitate to play this next guy because, frankly, he's got a way, way better voice than I do. Some people have written in saying your voice is like butter. Warm, gooey butter. And I thank you for that. But this guy, I don't know. It's going to have you swooning. If you can even pay attention to what he's saying, because not only does he have a great deep voice, but he also colors it with an Irish accent that is genuine, because that's where he's from. So Rob Morrow is next.
I think the main reason I became a patron was the community that's grown up around the podcast. I have family who left Ireland that fought in the Civil War on both sides, and my granny was always telling me stories about them. And it's great to find people who are like-minded, have that same interest, because, like I said, in Ireland, there's really not any outlet, any groups that are involved in Civil War history. even though so many Irish fought in it. You know, it's like I'm sitting there in the room with Matt, Eric and the guys when they're talking, laughing, cracking, whether it's a Ask a Guide or a tour or a Addressing Gettysburg Today. It's something I always look forward to. And I think I've mentioned this to Matt before. I'm from a small village in Ireland, and we're quite a tight-knit little community. And Gettysburg, seeing how people talk about Gettysburg and people who live there, how they feel about it, it reminds me of my home. The way they look at Gettysburg feels like how I look at my home, Points Pass. They're very proud of it. They're very proud to live there, and they're dedicated to it. And Addressing Gettysburg is a credit to the town it's from, and a credit to its producers and everyone who's worked on it so hard. So keep it up, and thanks so much for all the hard work you do.
International connections. Rob has a local connection to the Civil War, which is what sparked his interest. And being a patron helps him connect to Gettysburg, to his world. But it also helps us connect Gettysburg to the rest of the world. You're helping us get the word out about this place that you love. Our love of Gettysburg reminds him of his love for his own hometown in Ireland. How nice is that? You know, I don't like my hometown. My hometown in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey, was very transient. Very few people have roots there that go down generations. Most people moved there because it was, right where two interstates meet, and there was farmland that they could develop, so they developed it. And it was at one point that was the extent of the urban sprawl in New Jersey, that town that I was in. And then, of course, it's just grown ever since then. It has no identity. It has no character. At least I never felt it did. Gettysburg does. And so, I mean, how nice is it for Rob to love his hometown so much and also love our love of Gettysburg? I can't relate to loving your own hometown. I can relate to loving the town you choose to move to, which is what I've done here in Gettysburg. But I kind of envy Rob for his voice, his talent. He also sings and plays stringed instruments. And he's a rower, a very remarkable young man. Lives in a small town in Ireland. Has connections to the Civil War. That town has connections to the Civil War. And he found us, thank God, and is able to live vicariously through us and everything like that. So I think that's great. I love it. And Rob's a good guy here. All right. Let's see who we're going to go on to next. Yes, Ryan Villene. Ryan, what have you got to dazzle us with? Go.
Hey, this is Ryan Villene from the Atlanta area. I've been interested in the Civil War for a long, long time, since I was maybe 5 or 6. I went to the battlefield at Gettysburg for the first time in the mid-90s when I was a kid, and then again in 2013 for the sesquicentennial. And really nothing has brought the war and the Battle of Gettysburg to life for me quite like this podcast, Addressing Gettysburg. And so becoming a supporter through Patreon was really the least I could do. The podcast is great, and for me it's been very inspiring because it's encouraged me to look into my own family's history very seriously and discover some really cool connections to the Civil War. And none of those personal discoveries would have been possible without that inspiration from Addressing Gettysburg. So it's a great podcast, and I'm very happy to support it.
Nothing has brought the war and Gettysburg to life quite like AG. Now, this is a fantasy of mine that when I started doing this, I fantasized that people would say things like this. And so, Ryan, thank you very much for actually saying that in your own voice that I could play for people to hear, to prove once and for all to the people who knew me best that I can do it. No. Ryan, he was encouraged to look into family history because of Addressing Gettysburg. One of the things we do on Patreon with the episodes is we're trying to bring a more comprehensive, well-rounded approach to learning about all this stuff. Because, you can learn about the battle, and we could do just shows about the Battle of Gettysburg, but nothing happens in a vacuum. The Battle of Gettysburg is the result of how many more battles before it, how many more decisions before it, how many more leadership changes before it. So many things go into one event, big and small. So many things go into one event happening that I think we would be doing you a disservice if our Patreon shows only focused on the Battle of Gettysburg. The rule used to be that in order to do a Patreon show, the subject had to have the slightest connection to the Battle of Gettysburg. For example, the Little Bighorn episode, which is a very popular episode among patrons. It's Jim Hessler and myself. It's called the Gettysburg Connections or Gettysburg Ties to the Battle of the Little Bighorn, but I think we spend 30 milliseconds on the Gettysburg ties, and we just spend the rest of the 2 hours and change talking about the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And people love that episode. You need a palate cleanser every once in a while, number one. But number two, I think they love the episode so much because it's another one of those battles that has captured the American imagination. And you hear two guys who are fans of it talking about it off the top of their head. I think you can't help but like it. When you can tell people are enthusiastic about whatever they're talking about, it's hard to not listen and like it too. So bringing it to life, though, I don't know exactly what he's referring to when he says that. I think it might be the whole everything. But that at least is the goal with our narrative episodes when I can write them and put them out. Because the battle, well, now that we're at the battle, it's going to get, hopefully I'll bring it to life. I have to find some horrific sound effects though. But anyway, that's beside the point. Patreon, we want you to have a better understanding of the Battle of Gettysburg and the Civil War as a whole. So that's why we will interview anybody that has anything to talk about regarding the Civil War. That's why we have people on with books that have nothing to do with the Battle of Gettysburg, like Caroline Janey was on to talk about Ends of War, her awesome book. If you haven't gotten a hold of it, get a hold of it. She was on to talk about that. There were guys who were at Gettysburg at Appomattox, but we really didn't talk about Gettysburg. We talked about Ends of War. So that's something that you're going to get over at Patreon that we don't really do too much on the free feed. Now naturally those shows are going to come out once in a while, but we don't put them all out. And we're going to start going back to doing just the first 15 minutes as previews. So yeah, there's that. All right, moving on to our next person here. Good old Tommy Malone. Tommy Malone, let's see what he has to say. Thomas Malone is how he said it, so let's respect what he said. Thomas, go ahead.
Hi, Matt. This is Tom Malone from outside of Boston, Massachusetts. I became a patron of Addressing Gettysburg when I came across your program by accident on a YouTube search. And I was astonished and psyched that there was what I would call a radio program focused on the Battle of Gettysburg. I mean, who could not want that? You and your crew are a great bunch to listen to. You have fantastic guests, and it's just a really good experience overall. And it was a no-brainer to become a patron, hoping that your program flourishes and continues. I wish you the best. Thanks.
Great bunch to listen to and fantastic guests. Well, I mean, I must be modest here and humble about the great bunch to listen to. I mean, I don't know about Eric and Veronica and all the rest of them, but I definitely am. Thank you very much for that. And the guests are also great. We've been very lucky with the guests. Like, I don't know how we got so lucky. But the very first person I interviewed when we started was Scott Hartwig, who to me is like untouchable, right? Scott Hartwig is like the Robert De Niro of Park Service employees. I mean, you know, I grew up watching him, again, when the History Channel showed history, he was on like every show that had to do with the Civil War. And I always thought he had a good point to make, and he just had a command when he spoke. And then when I moved here, I auditioned for a video that the Park Service was putting out, and who was there standing in judgment of me but Mr. Hartwig himself. And I went in. I actually practiced for this audition. I went in, I auditioned. I did not get the part, and I still remind Scott about that every time I see him. But he was the first person that I got on the show. And it was just by chance. I met his wife, and I said, oh, well, do you think Scott would ever do the show? She said, sure. And she put us in touch, and he did it, and it was great. It was a great shot in the arm. Your first interview with Scott Hartwig. And everyone since then, people say, how do you get these guests? And I say to them, this is going to sound like a real asshole thing to say, but it's the God's honest truth. And they go, okay, what? And I say, I ask them. And it really is sometimes that simple. You'll find that people are worse to you in your mind before you ever talk to them than they actually are when you talk to them. Just because you think someone is a big deal does not mean that they think they're a big deal, even though all the evidence might point to them thinking they're a big deal. Just trust me when I say that. So, again, if you're a podcaster and you want to start podcasting, but you're afraid to ask guests, don't be. Ask them. They'll be flattered probably, and they'll probably say yes. I've only had 2 people give me a flat out no. And the one reason was because I don't do interviews, and the other reason was I don't think I'm Gettysburg enough for you. And that if you knew who that was crazy. That was crazy. Not crazy, but it was. I couldn't believe that person thought that they couldn't do a Gettysburg show. I think that was just a nice way of saying, you're a loser, get away from me. But yes, so guests, we have a wide array of people. The free feed is limited because we only do Ask a Guides, but our guests on that show are also great. I mean, you can't be a guide and not have a personality, theoretically. So, yeah. Yeah. And we also have guides on Patreon as well to talk more in depth about something. And we get our hands dirty in like whatever subject matter the guest is speaking on. But I also feel it's important to get to know the person too. So we get to know these names that you've only read or seen on television. If my favorite actor is out there promoting a movie, I don't want to watch a 30 or 60 minute interview with them talking about the movie that I haven't seen yet because it's not out in the theaters. I don't mind a little bit of that, but I want to know about that person. I want to hear stories about their life. It's an interesting person. It's a celebrity. It's a person who has done something that I have noticed and that many other people have noticed. And I want to know who this person is, what makes them tick, what is their story like. And so I think that those make for better interviews. You know, when we have an author on, I tell them, tell me one chapter of the book. I'm going to read that chapter. We're going to base the interview off of that. And maybe we'll spend a third of the interview talking about that, and then we'll just see where it goes. And they're fine with that. And I want to know about these people. I want to know who they are, how they got to where they got. And I think it helps the listener to know that stuff too. Because, look, every single human being has self-doubt. I find it to be helpful to listen to the way people made it, because nobody graduates high school or college and falls into the dream job that you know them to have, that you would love to have. Some people do, but those people are so few and so rare, I'm not even going to really acknowledge them. But most people have a journey that takes them to whatever it is that you know their name for. And that's interesting to me. That's what I want to talk about. And so that's what we asked them about. So yeah, so that's what you get over at Patreon as well there. That was Tommy Malone, of course. Okay, that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I didn't ramble on too much. I like doing these where I kind of just get to talk to you every once in a while. And I guess interview myself is really what I just did there. But anyway, I thank all the patrons who sent in their recordings. I appreciate your continued support, guys, and all the ones who didn't send in their recordings. I appreciate your continued support as well. And any of you that listened to this and said, you know what, I am going to support this idiot. I am going to become a patron over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. I thank you in advance. I certainly do. I look forward to having you in the club. I look forward to seeing any of you on any of our Get Out of the Car tours. You don't have to be a patron to do that. Everybody is welcome to those. But yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Thank you for at least considering becoming a patron if you don't. Thank you for listening as a free feed listener, regardless of your Patreon status. I know not everybody has money just lying around. I understand that. So believe me, you are no less appreciated as a free patron or as a free feed listener, because I know someday when your ship comes in, you will become a patron over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. Hey, I'm sorry that you had an hour-long commercial here for our Patreon episode, but this is how the bills get paid. This is how food gets put into our big bloated bellies, and this is how we're going to grow it into like a Walt Disney World type of thing here in Gettysburg. We are not done. We are not stopping at a podcast. We have much bigger, much better ideas. The podcast will always be here, but these other things will start to spring off the side as investors come along and all these other things that we need to do. But that's not the point. The point is, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And once again, it's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. The link is in the description. I wish you all the best, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll talk to you next time.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, forsooth 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for debt shall go to jail from Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for debt shall go to jail from Gary Owen in glory.